It's a great pleasure to be here in a completely new environment from what would have been the case on the 28th of May. We're sitting here on well after the 29th of May now, well over 100 days into the government of national unity, and South Africa is another country. We knew before the election for quite a long time that the ANC was likely to get under 50%. I was prepared to bet on around 45%, but very few people were prepared to bet on 40%. The irony is that in 2019, I said the ANC was going to get 40% in 2024, and you don't have to take my word for it. It's there on a tape recording that was leaked by Herman Mashaba to try and embarrass me, and in the end it proved quite the opposite. But in 2019 I said that in 2024 the DA was going to get around 20% and the ANC was going to get around 40%. But in the run-up to the election I thought the ANC was going to crack about 45%, and then a week before the election they signed the National Health Insurance Bill into law, and we saw their votes tracking down, because far from mobilizing the constituency that they thought they would mobilize by that reform, they alienated a large chunk of the black middle class, who either stayed away from the polls or voted for opposition parties, because no one is keen on using their private medical insurance in South Africa. And so that proved to be a fatal miscalculation by the ANC. That was one of the fatal miscalculations. The second fatal miscalculation was to underestimate the sway of former President Jacob Zille. And you would think that a person who presided over what we call in South Africa as state capture, where 1.5 trillion rand was lost in corruption between 2014 and 2019, not my numbers, the Zondo Commission's numbers, and that had totally gutted out the state, destroyed institutions, destroyed our state-owned entities, made many more people poorer, pushed unemployment on the broad definition up to 42%, you would think that that person wouldn't get a single vote in South Africa. And yet, he started a party in the December before the election in May, and he almost got a clear majority in KwaZulu-Natal, he got 45%, which has to tell you something. It tells you that elections in South Africa, even though we have a constitutional democracy and we have the rules of the game, elections are not fought and won on the issues. They are largely fought on issues of identity. And you saw that the Zulu people swung very strongly behind Jacob Zuma and his party Mkhonto weSizwe, otherwise known as shortened form MK. And then the second biggest party in KwaZulu-Natal was the Electoral Freedom Party, which is another ethnic-based party. The ANC trailed behind them, and then we came in doing not too badly in the circumstances. So we managed actually to form a coalition government in KwaZulu-Natal. And it was very interesting because the biggest party in our coalition is the Electoral Freedom Party, which is a Zulu nationalist party largely, although when I say that now, they'll get back to South Africa and they'll be highly offended. But in South Africa, people always get offended with the truth. Actually, not only in South Africa, everywhere they get offended by the truth. So, but I don't care because, I don't mind. I really don't mind being the only politician in the world that gets into trouble for telling the truth. I'd rather do it that way than any other way, and history will prove that I'm right. So, there's the Electoral Freedom Party, there's the ANC, and there's the DA, and then there is the National Freedom Party, which is an offshoot of the IFP, broke away under Zanele Mgwazi-Msibi, if you remember her. She unfortunately died rather premature death, but the remnants of her party are called the NFP. They got a single seat in KwaZulu-Natal, the only seat they won in the whole country. And with that single seat, they had the balance of power in KwaZulu-Natal. And the big question was, would they come to us or would they go to Jacob Zuma? Because if they'd gone to Jacob Zuma, you would have had Jacob Zuma, the EFF, and the NFP would have formed a majority. And on the other hand, we had IFP, ANC, DA, NFP forming a four-party coalition.
Thank you.
So it was a very interesting outcome, and obviously the single NFP seat in KwaZulu-Natal is probably the most leveraged politician in the whole country, and I hope that they stay the course. But nevertheless, that is what South Africa's coalitions are made of. It's always not stuff, it's always one seat here and one seat there, because we have a proportional representation system without thresholds. Now let me explain a little bit what that means and why it is so significant. Britain doesn't understand coalition politics at all. They understand first past the post on a constituency level. In complex, plural, divided societies, the first past the post system ends up being highly undemocratic because it just takes a little gerrymandering of boundaries, and the biggest party can ensure that it gets 50% plus one in every constituency, leaving the 49% without representation at the end of the day. So it was critically important that we did move to a proportional representation system. However, every country with a proportional representation system has thresholds, because proportional representation systems encourage the fragmentation of politics. If you have a constituency system, you have two big parties or sometimes three big parties vying for power. In proportional representation systems, people can get elected on very few votes proportionately and then hold the balance of power and determine who's going to govern, because you have to get above 50% if you want to run a stable government. So thresholds are there to make sure that you at least have some reasonable support in the population that warrants you having a very powerful position after the election. We have absolutely no threshold at all, which, when you use Johannesburg, the poor benighted city of my birth, as an example, in Johannesburg, a party that got 0.2% of the vote managed to get two mayors in a row. Babela Commander was the last one of those, and he's now been charged and arrested for fraud. He was the mayor of Johannesburg on the basis of a party that couldn't even get 1% of the vote in that city. And they did that because his vote was critical to determine which side would win, and they threw their weight in behind the ANC, and on the condition that he was made the mayor. And the ANC took that condition to continue holding on to all the tender-rich portfolios, as they quite politely phrased it. So you've known the great South African contribution to English language, tender premier, and those are fulsome in the ANC. So they managed to hold on to Johannesburg and inherited Step, but also that doesn't stop anybody from ensuring that the tenders and the contracts and the positions go to politically connected people. So it is a very serious shortcoming of our system that we don't have any thresholds. In Germany, they have a threshold of 5%. Our sister party in Germany is the FDP. Sometimes they don't get 5%, so they fall out of parliament entirely. And they have to work back to get 5% to get into government at all. And then they have coalitions. So we have this extraordinary situation of not having any thresholds, and we're working very hard as the DA to do electoral reform and to bring in thresholds. Obviously, there are a myriad of tiny little parties. I mean, there's like 120 of them. Object furiously, because any person who wants to start a party knows that if they just get a broad circle in their home base to vote for them, they can get elected and be paid as the leader of the party. It's a huge incentive. So we are fighting for electoral reform very hard. And in fact, electoral reform has become existential to us in the next election. We just had the 2024 election. We're already flat bang into the 2026 election. We're working hard to get that off the ground. So I told you about the results of KwaZulu-Natal. Let me get to the result elsewhere. While we're working on electoral reform, we're trying to set up coalition governments wherever we can, but not at any price. I told you about KwaZulu-Natal. Fortunately, in the Western Cape, we don't need a coalition. Now, another thing, in the proportional representation system, getting over 50% is a very rare occurrence. Angela Merkel was the Chancellor of Germany, who for many years had a percentage for her party in the late 20%. That's a good percentage in a coalition-based system, in a proportional representation system. You don't have to get above 50%. And that is what we have to keep on telling South Africans. They say, but the DA can't give above 50%. I say, well, we do in the Western Cape, because people have seen the DA difference and they like it. But we don't have to get above 50%. We just have to be the biggest party in the coalition. And so what we're going for, hell for leather, in 2026, is to try and be the biggest party in as many local governments as we can, because of course that's a local government election, and especially the Gauteng metros. Gauteng is a province of metros, and we are doing our very best to try and become the largest party in all the metros. And of course, urban government is much more important than provincial government when it comes to the economy. And if we become the biggest party in all of those metros in Gauteng, we effectively run the economy. And that is going to be very important. So we are going hell for leather. At the moment, I'm doing a massive talent search across the whole of South Africa to find brilliant mayoral candidates and to find a slate of local government candidates who will really be able to put together competent, diverse local governments to take us to the next step of 2029, where we would like to be the biggest party at a national level in South Africa, on the assumption that the ANC will continue unraveling. So no, we're not going to get above 50%, but no one is. The critical thing about the election that happened this year was that it broke single-party dominance. That is the single most important thing. And the importance of that should not for a moment be underestimated. Because we were a single-party dominant democracy forever, and people keep on saying, well, you know, we have this wonderful free media. I roll my eyes at that. I mean, the media are sort of free, but they're always free to fight with the DA. And then the judiciary, although that poor institution is hanging on by its fingernails, and then they speak about non-governmental organizations. They never mention the Democratic Alliance that has grown from a 1.7% party to a party of government, not only in 30 municipalities where we have mayors, but in a province, and now we're part of a government nationally. And that is an unbelievable shortcut through history, if you have to think about it. And the key role that we have in trying to be a party of government is to get into government and show the DA difference. And we've certainly done that in Cape Town. If you compare Cape Town with any of the other major cities, it's just common cause. Everybody knows that the DA governs better. And still, that doesn't swing a vote just as much as Zuma's huge legacy of corruption and abuse, power abuse, did not swing votes away from him. So slowly we have to start changing that, and we are changing it. And beautifully, 2 weeks ago in our polling, the DA overtook the EFF in the number of black votes that we get. So this is a slow process. We're the only party that is genuinely non-racial in the voter base we've got. 1/3 black voters, 1/3 white voters, 1/3 coloured voters. They come together because they want a non-racial party. So it sounds kind of contradictory to even break it down into racial terms. But the DA's selling proposition is not to try and out-ANC the ANC. It's to be something completely different. And to stand for that unashamedly, and to show the path that will lead to economic growth and will lead to a better standard of living for everybody. And the most single important thing for us is to follow policies that drive investment, growth, and jobs. South Africa's single biggest problem is unemployment. By far. By far. People speak about the triple challenge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. I say, if you just solve the unemployment problem, all else will look after itself. And the unemployment problem is rooted in economic decline. And economic decline is rooted in policies that are totally unfriendly to investment. And if you want to get investment, which is absolutely a precondition for job creation, you've got to remove policies that deter investment. It's not rocket science, it's bloody obvious. And the ANC has got a completely split personality on this. On the one hand, internationally, they talk like Parkstown did today about the importance of the private sector, and they talk wonderful language about public-private partnerships and concessioning to the private sector. But inside South Africa, it is still this totally retrogressive analysis about seeing business not as a force for good, but as an enemy of the poor. Now, I'm just mind-boggled by that disconnect, that cognitive dissonance, I think is the formal word for it. Because they know what the truth is, but they can't find the courage to say it, given their history rooted in the National Democratic Revolution, Soviet-inspired, the notion that the leader must control the party must control the state must control the economy, and then everything will come right. Well, they know that it's not true anymore, but try and transform a party while telling everybody in it that the articles of faith that they've lived by for 50 or 60 years was all misdirected. Very, very hard thing to do. And I know that because I've tried to transform the DA and take it on a new path and hold everybody in and hold everybody together. It's not easy from a political point of view. And from the ANC's point of view, it's extraordinarily difficult. So I have some sympathy for them as far as that's concerned. But the second very important thing about this last election, apart from breaking the single-party dominance of South Africa, is that it really gave momentum to the politics of realignment. Political boundaries between parties are really quite obsolete in South Africa. Because people who run the Treasury, the Reserve Bank, South African Revenue Service, have much more in common with our political philosophy than they do with the ANC's political philosophy or stated political philosophy. And many, many people in the Government of National Unity have far more in common with us than they do with Jacob Zuma or the EA. And the choice after this election could not have been starker. Because when you're in a country like Britain and across the entire Europe and all the developed democracies, I just laugh at the issues that they form different parties around, you know. There's such minor policy differences because they all agree on the fundamentals. They all agree on constitutionalism and the rule of law. They all agree on accountable government. They all agree that a market-based economy is critical to drive growth and jobs. They all agree that government should be limited and not interfere everywhere. And the only debate is the extent of that interference and where it should draw the line. And so when I look at the policy differences that define parties in other parts of the world in established democracies, I think that's nothing. In South Africa, the odds are between parties that want to trash the Constitution and parties that want to retain the Constitution. These are big, big stakes. You saw Mugabe trash the Constitution through blaming Britain all the time for everything that was going wrong. So you find a scapegoat, you blame the scapegoat, and you trash the Constitution, and you tell people that the answer is more power in fewer hands. Now, we are at a really important crossroads, and it was very important that after the ANC fell below 45% to 40%, they chose to go with us. And the importance of that decision cannot be overestimated. Now, it was a little dance, as everything is in South Africa, very well choreographed. And we had a strategy of being the last man standing. So Cyril Ramaphosa invited everybody to come and negotiate, and they did. And we said, right, we've got to be the last people in the ring. And true to form, the EFF went along there. They were so rude that they burned their bridges on the first meeting. And MK went along there, and they didn't really want to do a deal with Cyril Ramaphosa at all. They were basically arguing at that point that they'd been robbed of a victory in KwaZulu-Natal through the manipulation of the Independent Electoral Commission. So they were more intent on getting control of KwaZulu-Natal. And we, believe it or not, were all sweetness and light, even me. And we went in there, and we were trying to be as polite and nice and get all the atmospherics right and do all of that. And slowly we started finding each other. And at one point, Fikile Mbalula said to me, Helen, I think you've done too good a job at demonizing me. I said, yes, I think you have. It's been your pet project over the last 30 years or whatever it's been. Anyway, so we got an agreement together, which was a very dramatic story in its own right. Because unlike other countries that put together coalition agreements between many parties, our constitution says that 2 weeks after an election, you have to constitute a government. Now, that's not made for coalition negotiations at all, especially not very complex ones. And I don't know whether it's by design or by sheer incompetence, but the ANC is very good at weaponizing time. So they leave everything till the last minute, everything till the last minute. And you think you're making great progress, you're doing a bit of work every day and getting this done and this done. Then the night before, they send you a completely new document. And this is the night before we're now going to meet in the convention centre, because Parliament burnt down, as you know. We'll meet in the convention centre to elect the Speaker of the National Assembly and the President, the night before we get a completely new document. We sat negotiating and negotiating and negotiating about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, in which case I get a lovely little note from the ANC saying they're calling it a night now, and it's going to be escalated to the President, who will talk to our leader, that's John Steenhuisen. So poor old John had to be rooted out at 3 o'clock in the morning by me, and I told him who we were, and I said this and this and this and this, and don't give in on this, because this is why this is critical. Anyway, John took it all in, and eventually I went home to get 1 or 2 hours sleep. And then at 6:10 in the morning, the phone pings and I look at it, and we've saved the critical clauses, so I'm fine with that. 7:50 ping again, completely new document. Completely new document. And when I look at the track changes, I see all the changes that have been made by President Ramaphosa in the track changes. I phoned back and I said, we don't have an agreement, because we are not going to vote for your Speaker or your President if this is the document on which you want us to sign. Not happening. So I quickly rushed to the convention centre. My poor husband had to drive me there because I was on the phone and doing all of those things in the meantime. We got there, and there's this huge media scrum, and they pour onto you, and I said, there's no agreement. And of course, there were rand crashes and a million other things happened. And of course, then they started swearing in the MPs, no agreement. And Judge Zondo says, we're now calling for nominations for Speaker. And I said, there's no agreement. And John's sitting there in the parliamentary benches, and I'm WhatsApping him saying, there's no agreement. We cannot vote for Tokotitisa. And I said, and there wasn't going to be an agreement at all. And there we were sitting at number 99, me realizing exactly what it would mean. Crash the economy, crash the rand, crash everything. But we could not go into an agreement where we would be captives and where we would be co-opted. We were in it to share power, not to be co-opted. And the terms had to be power-sharing terms. We understood that we had not won the election. We did not claim to want sole power, because on 22% of the vote, you can't dare claim that. You can't do everything. But the ANC got 40% of the vote, and they couldn't claim it either. They couldn't govern without us. So I said this is going to be a proper power-sharing agreement. And I compromised on the proportionality clause, because you have to say, okay, what's absolutely critical? You can't renegotiate everything. What is absolutely critical? Proportionality clause, the sufficient consensus clause, and the clause that dominated or defined how other parties would join the coalition government. In the end, I made the die-in-the-ditch issue the sufficient consensus clause. Now, you know that sufficient consensus is a wonderful South African concept that was born at the Cadesta negotiations, and I had the great advantage of having been there, so I knew quite a lot about the development of the sufficient consensus idea. And basically what it meant was, if the ANC and the National Party agree at Cadesta, then whatever everybody else says, it doesn't matter. But we just can't go on a vague, feel-good historical definition like that. We have to get proper codified definition in the agreement. And the president had changed it to make it absolutely meaningless, and I said, we're not budging on this, there won't be an agreement. Literally, Judge Zondo calls for nominations of the Speaker. Floyd Shivambu of the EFF gets up and says, Chief Justice, Chief Justice, can we have a caucus break? I'm saying, yeah, go Floyd. We had to have a caucus break so I could do the final negotiation. Chief Justice says, no, we're going on. Floyd Shivambu doesn't give up. He says, there's got to be a caucus break. I'm WhatsApping everybody. Support Floyd Shivambu, support Floyd Shivambu. And I'm going crazy there with my cell phone, cracked cell phone, and I'm doing it. Eventually, Floyd was so persistent that we got the caucus break. And I could say to the ANC, listen, I'm dead serious. If you don't change this clause, if I don't get a signed document with this change clause, there's no agreement. And in that caucus break, they agreed to change the clause back to what we'd insisted on, and Fikile and Malula signed it. And that is the only reason why we got an agreement on a coalition government. Not that that helped too much, but the ANC just ignores everything that they agreed to. Unbelievable. You cannot believe it. It is quite a most amazing thing. You sign an agreement, and the culture that I come from and my party comes from is that these words are sacred. You put such a lot of work into them, you put such a lot of effort into them. Oh. And you say to them, no, you can't do that. And they look at you as if you will. Because the ANC fundamentally has accepted that it's lost sole power. It just has not sunk in, because for 30 years they've done what they like. And now suddenly they can't. And so you get exactly what has happened this last week. Mr. Ramaphosa goes off to Kazan, and he calls Vladimir Putin a valued ally and friend. And he said, excuse me, that's not the government's position. We've never said that we think he's a valued ally and friend. And they said, oh, why can't we say that? And he said, you can't say that because you said Putin had always been a valued ally and friend of South Africa, and we don't agree, and we're in the government. And you cannot simply say things without getting a government agreement. And if you don't agree, you've got to invoke the clearinghouse mechanism to get an agreement. And so this, they're absolutely boggled about it. It's a presidential prerogative, Mr. Yodis. Policy, legislation, and regulation have to be agreed by the government. And so we go through this little dance every week or so. Now, it is incredibly important for us to stick to our guns. Nobody likes it. Everyone likes you to be nice and to play nice. And most of the business community really wanted us to do one thing, and that was to prop up Cyril Ramaphosa and protect him from the EFF and the MK. That's what they wanted us to do. But that's not our game. We're not there to prop up Cyril Ramaphosa. We're there to share power. And we're there to have a real impact on policy, on legislation, and on regulations. And we're going to stand there and we're going to fight for the things we believe in. Because we're not promoting ourselves, we're promoting South Africa's best interests. And we know that the only way South Africa can be saved is by investment, growth, and jobs. And everything that undermines investment, growth, and jobs, we will oppose on principle. And we will oppose it very firmly. And the way you destroy investment, growth, and jobs is by following policies that alienate people, that send them out of the country on immigration tickets, and that do all of that. I mean, there's the most amazing statistic of all in South Africa. There's 7.8 million registered personal taxpayers. There are 28 million grant recipients. In Britain, there are, let me work this out now, there are 4 taxpayers for every grant recipient. In Germany, there are 5 taxpayers for every grant recipient. In South Africa, there are 4 grant recipients for every taxpayer. And that ratio cannot work out. And by far, the most personal income tax is paid by 100,000 South Africans. 100,000 South Africans who earn above 65,000 pounds a year. There are 100,000 of those in South Africa, and just their tax supports 26 million social grants. That statistic has to be taken on board because we have got such a narrow tax base that the last thing you want to do if you want to grow the economy and protect the very poor is drive more taxpayers out of the country. And so we will defend that tax base because we want people to stay in South Africa. I'm here because I want you all to come back. And we want that to happen. And so we're not going to keep quiet to go along to get along. And every time I say something, a million people come thundering down on me because I'm a lightning conductor. I don't know why. I just I just call it as I see it, and I think we have to. And we will stand up and fight for the things that we know will save this country. It's also very important to understand that we're in a coalition and we're the minority party in the coalition. So we can't get everything our way, but we're certainly going to use our balance of power. We've got to give up some things, but the ANC's also got to give up some things. And we're going to negotiate very hard about those things because these negotiations didn't stop at the election. But it's also very salutary to realize that as far as I've been able to research, maybe some of you know of one example, but there's not a single party that's been a smaller party in a governing coalition that has ever gone forward at the next election in the world. And we've got to be the exception to that. Now we're up for that. We're up for being the exception because, South Africans are resilient. That's why we won 4 World Cups and Britain hasn't won one. Yeah. Just saying. So, we're the place where you have resilient people prepared to fight hard for what they want. So, the important thing is that we have to grow at the next election because the worst possible thing for South Africa is if the DA withers and dies. People yell on about, and it's true, the media is really important, civil society is really important, the bench is really important, but without a party that can win elections through the ballot box, none of that is going to exist. And people don't want to hear that, and they don't want to listen to that, they don't want to appreciate exactly how critical the role of the DA is. So we understand how important the role of the DA is, and history will understand how important the role of the DA is, but we're not here to kill off the DA, or to do a Nick Clegg, or to do any of those things. We're there to fight our corner for the policies that we know are essential to save our country. And so we appreciate the work that all of you do, everywhere you are, to bring the huge potential of South Africa and the critical importance of South Africa to the whole African continent. Because if we perish and die, it's very bad news for the rest of Africa. And as you know, Africa has got a burgeoning population, a very young population, and if the economic engine from the south collapses, there's nothing left, or much less left. So we're not indispensable, but we are in South Africa, and we continue to make sure that the country succeeds. And we do that by living from one election to the next, doing the very best we can to bring the best talent on board, get the best strategies we can achieve to maximize our votes, to bring those voters out on election day, wherever they are in the world, and to ensure that we become the biggest party in our beloved country, and then South Africa will be saved. Thanks very much.
Can you share a bit with us as to what sort of things you were trying to do and how you so quickly cemented it down and put KwaZulu-Natal on the map in the way it is?
Well, KwaZulu-Natal was the easiest negotiation of all. But actually, I wasn't involved in this. It was done by the locals for KwaZulu-Natal. And it was very easy because the choice was so stark. Either the IFP, the ANC, the DA, and the NFP got together, or it would be Zuma and the EFF. And they fell one seat short of getting that critical majority, which was the NFP seat. I tell you, margins in South Africa are razor thin. That's why every vote counts so much. And the critical question, the only question, that whole negotiation was where will the NFP go? It's the only question. And they came with us. And then we fixed it. But the important thing was the ANC has this huge principle of the biggest party must get the premier, except in KwaZulu-Natal, where the IFP is the biggest party of the coalition, the ANC split. We said, well, I'm doing fine. If we establish a principle, it's a principle for everybody, and including for you. And then the IFP got the premier. So that was fine, and that's what they said. We had a failed negotiation in Gauteng. And that was one that I was. But it was one where Panyaza Lesufi, does anybody know of the name Panyaza Lesufi? Panyaza Lesufi is the leader of the RET, that's the Radical Economic Transformation faction in Gauteng. And Panyaza Lesufi is a very difficult and complex individual who has so much to hide that he couldn't dare to have us in any meaningful role in the government because he knew that we would unearth a lot of things. And so he was not prepared to, in any way, share power with us in a meaningful way. Now, you've got to understand, in Gauteng, the ANC fell to 34%. And we got 28%. So we were literally 6 percentage points behind the ANC in Gauteng. And we said, right, there's a proportionality clause in the agreement. So now we have broad proportionality. And in the government, there are 13 positions. So we said that means 7 for you and 6 for us. And if you want to bring anybody else in, you give up one of your positions. If we want to bring in somebody else, we give up one of our positions. Oh no, they wanted to make room for all the smaller parties because they want to have cover so they don't have to say they're in a coalition here. And they want to bring in all the other smaller parties. So they said, we will give you 3 positions and the other smaller parties 3 positions. That'll be your 6. I said, oh my dead body. So no, they were definitely not going to do that. And I said, well, then there's no agreement. There's no agreement. You're not going anywhere. And then I pushed them quite hard, and they later admitted that they weren't intending to give any other smaller party any seats at all. They were just pushing us to agree that we'd take 3 and give 3 to the smaller parties, then the smaller parties wouldn't get any. And we'd be sitting with 3 and they'd have 10. That's what they were doing. And I said, look, you don't come here and try and manipulate us like this. This is dishonest. I said, these negotiations are now over. Goodbye. And I went out and I had a big press conference. So
a glass of wine would be great.
So anyway, I mean, I said to the public in Johannesburg, I said, we got 28% of the vote, thank you very much, but if you want us to be in government, we have to be good against politics. So we're very close, 6 percentage points, and you know what to do in Johannesburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Mogale City next time. So I'd much rather be in opposition to Panyaza Lesu if you're going to be captured. And it was a very right thing to do because he wouldn't tell us which portfolios he was going to give us. And the 2 big ones in provincial government are education and health. And in the end, he gave the other 3 parties the seats that he was going to give to us. One is agriculture in Gauteng. And it is the 3 parties.
Rooftop gardens.
Yeah. And the other one is, he invented something called e-government, which no one's ever heard of. I mean, it is a thing, but you don't have you only make a department like that when you don't want people to get anything else. And then the third one was environment, which he said we need to clean up the streets of Johannesburg, which has got nothing to do with provincial government. So they were just trying to manipulate us, and at one stage he was very disarmingly honest. He said to a journalist, we can't possibly let the DA have a serious department, because if we do, they'll just do it better than us and get more votes. So he was very honest about that. But that's exactly, it was 2 things. They didn't want us to get a decent portfolio so show what we do, and they were terrified of the skeletons that we would dig up there. So they didn't do it. In my leadership term, I added over 2 million votes to the DA's total between 2007 when I became the leader and 2014. So that was great, but I thought, okay, now I've taken the party as far as I can go. And if we can get a black leader that has the same liberal values and vision, we'll grow nicely. And Umusi Maimane had pitched up on the scene, and I thought he had what it took. He ticked all the boxes. Non-racialism, understanding market economics, ethical, I thought, okay, great. All the boxes are ticked. And he turned out not to be any of the above, I'm afraid. And between 2015 and 2019, we lost over 600,000 votes from all communities. So we went backwards for the very first time since 1994. And then he set up a commission to investigate. And the commission came up and said, it's your weak leadership that's causing the party to disintegrate. So he had to step down. And by that stage, a hell of a lot of people were approaching me and saying, will I please come back? So I was happily retired and getting on with my own life. But Musi had done his very best to push me out of the party after I'd done absolutely everything to support him. Do that as it may. If you want any loyalty in politics, as they say, get a dog. So that's fine. I live with that. But he was unravelling the party, and it was really dramatically going backwards, and the machinery of the party was going backwards. So people came to me and said, I really have to stand. So I thought, discussed with my husband, he said to me, are you mad? You're going to do X and Y. And then he woke up the next morning and he says, no, I know you'll never rest if you don't give it a try, so go and do it. So I ran a campaign, and I got through on the first ballot. And then the next time I was unopposed. The next time I wasn't unopposed. I was opposed, but then I got well over 2/3. And the next time I was unopposed. So that's where we are today. Well, tomorrow we have the medium-term budget policy statement. And that's a big milestone. And that is where the government announces its key policy objectives in the medium-term budget statement. And we've got an excellent Deputy Minister of Finance who's very attuned to Gorongwana. And we've worked very hard to get some key things into that medium-term budget policy statement. Now, before I was going to appear today, Paul Ashel Sarupan, just as I said, our Deputy Minister, said, don't say anything in a market sensitivity and this and that. So I said I won't. But I said, he agreed that I could say that there's going to be a lot of focus on infrastructure build and a lot of focus on ensuring there's a debt ceiling. You don't go into further debt to fund grants and lavish lifestyles and all of that nonsense. And that we protect frontline services as hard as we can. So that's what we're going to be doing, and it's the first time we'll be really landing some of our policies in the government and in the budget. If it's not in the budget, it's nowhere. So, that's where it's got to be. And so Ashwell has done a bloody heroic job, but he's had the Treasury behind. I cannot tell you how relieved the Treasury is that we're there. And they've been fighting a lot of abuse in government spending, and now we're there to give them the biggest backup we can. So it's interesting to find out how many allies we actually have got in government. And it's really useful to use that muscle. But believe me, it's incredibly important that they keep attacking us. This was very important. So, I don't know what. Gwedi says, the Sunday Times ran a big headline. Gwedi, Zille, you are not the boss. Remember that? And I read that article. It was an absolute nothing article. And I phoned the Sunday and I said, you guys just didn't have a front page lead and were searching around for something to write. It is exactly what happened. And then why was Cyril fighting with me? I don't remember. Why was Fikile fighting with me? Because he always does.
So in the letter he wrote to...
Oh, the letter!
Slightly insulting remark.
Of course he did.
Remember.
No, but that's a very important story. That's a very, very, very instructive story.
Then we'll take another question.
Oh, no. Sorry, I'm carrying on.
No, please go ahead. I'm curious now.
So, we've just agreed on a proportionality clause, and we're now negotiating cabinet positions. And Cyril Ramaphosa will not say how many positions they're going to be in total. And obviously, if you don't know how many positions are going to be there in total, you don't know what a third of the positions are. Because the ANC got 40%, we got 20%, they have to have 2 to 1, we get a third, they get 2/3, right? Well, you can only work out a third and 2/3 if you know what the total is. We all know that much maths. And he wasn't going to tell us that, right? So he promised to the election he was going to have a smaller cabinet, so we thought, okay, well, let's not be too optimistic. Let's work on about 27, and we then entitled to 9. And you don't go in with your bottom line, you go in with, a negotiating position. So I wrote him a letter and I said, we would like a cabinet minister in each of the clusters, and we would like these. And I listed 10 we thought would be good to have. They promptly leaked the letter to the press to say, look at this cheeky DA. How dare they say this? How dare they? I said, how do you mean, how dare they? We've just signed an agreement that has a proportionality clause, that has a power sharing. What are you talking about? Do you think that we are sitting here and taking what you are kindly going to offer us? You did not win an election, nor did we. We write to you as partners in a coalition to say what is our due arising from the agreement. And that was the first time it really hit me. These guys don't know. They're doing us favours. They don't see this as a power sharing arrangement. And so we had hit back very hard at that, and I did. So that was Cyril. Well, Fikile got very upset because I said this was actually a coalition, not a government national unity. Anyone who can add knows that. Because you see, the ANC must fight. Because we don't want to go the way of Nick Clegg. Well, you see, the interesting thing was that in the negotiations, there was one portfolio that the ANC obsessively had to control, and that was international relations. They were absolutely obsessive. To the point that we got together and we said, okay, well, we can sort this all out by saying we insist on having international relations, and we're going to make Tony Leon the foreign minister. So if we do that, they'll say, You can have anything except that. Get a whole lot of stuff by using that leverage, you know. But I couldn't work out why they were so obsessively needed to have international relations. And this is my conclusion. I've got no evidence for this whatsoever. But I think the ANC gets funded by these rogue regimes. I think they get funded by Iran. I think they get funded by Russia. And they cannot let go that link. I don't think that the International Court of Justice was an initiative by the South African government. I think it was a quid pro quo from Iran. And, you know, I think they have such a connection with these rogue regimes for funding and everything else that that's what they do. So to answer the first question, the convening power in Britain was all Ludre and his colleagues. So that he must take all the political capital. Ludre is the international chair of the DA abroad. We take that ancillary very, very seriously because it brings us a lot of votes. And we ran a big court case in South Africa to enable consulates and honorary consulates to be voting stations as well, because the IEC completely limited that to embassies where there are South Africans stationed. And we said, no ways, the law doesn't say that. So we fought a case and won it, but it was too late to make the logistic arrangements. So in a sense, it was a Pyrrhic victory. We probably would have had 2 whole seats in Parliament on the back of our people abroad. And we're very keen on getting something in Perth, for example, which just has an honorary consulate. And there are literally tens of thousands of South Africans there. So we are very serious about our DA abroad. And we're serious because there are South Africans who are living abroad who actually wanted to come back to the country. They don't want to lose their contact with the country. And we are desperately keen to make it possible for them to come back to the country. So we keep the contact, and Ludre is the international big chief of DA abroad, and so he did the convening. He pumps everybody up and gets them all into the fierce, to use the South African word.
With the stickers on there, so you've been about here.
No, I don't think anybody had a chance in his great democratic way. Anyway, he did it very, very well. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question is, just quickly remind me, because I've seen it's hard of Ludre.
You're planning to 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
The DA.
Best way with that black middle class.
Yeah.
Political.
Yeah. Let me just answer that question. In Johannesburg, you can go weeks without water. And when you've got all your basic services, you can start being spun all kinds of lines about how the real issue in South Africa is race and this and that. When you don't have water, you think, maybe we should make the issue water. Maybe we should make the issue electricity. Maybe we should make the issue filling the potholes. Maybe we should make the issue getting the traffic lights working. And suddenly the issues become the issue. And you see that everything else has been a deliberate ruse to take your eyes off the issues. And so, where the DA governs, things work. And I'm afraid the converse is also true. And people see it. And the more they see basic services working, the more they like it. It takes a long time, but eventually the issues do become the issues. The critical thing is, do you want decent education? Do you want water? Do you want electricity? Do you want roads that function? Do you want us to get the 21 kilometers of rail, 21,000 kilometers of rail that is now unserviceable back into service? Do you want people to have a commuting system that works? Think a bit about it. And the DA is the only non-racial party, actually, in South Africa. It's the only credible non-racial party. The ANC is 100% black now. And it's got no minorities, and they don't bother about it, they don't even think about it. And so we're the one party that really has support from all races, and that's great, because it's all races who want a non-racial inclusive future. At least I am really friendly, and the ANC had to demonize me. The ANC had to demonize me because we were growing and winning elections. That's why.
So thank you very much, Helen. It's been an amazing, amazing time. I think we've heard some good class language. We've heard some good quality stories. We've heard some realities, and we've heard some stuff that goes on behind the curtains.
Yep.
And I think it's given all of us, from the contribution from the floor, but primarily from you, on the journey you've been through over the last 18 months for the country. And it's going to take you, the party, and everyone else in the country to actually work out what is right for the country, for the people, to get us to those three things you're talking about with growth, jobs, and investment. And also, 100% critical, you've got the support for all your initiatives from overseas, whether we're DA or not is besides the point. It is what's right for the country.